But before we get there, I just don't think I can ignore what is going on nationally, and especially what happened last Wednesday. And this is my opinion. It's not the opinion of the law school. It's nobody's opinion but my own. And you're free to criticize me in whatever forum you wish. Uh, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. And if you don't want to listen, you can sign off and do something else. So just a little personal background, even though all of you all had me for CivPro last year, you may not know a little bit of my at least political background. I grew up in Upper East Tennessee, and I always say I grew up a Republican. As a little boy, I pulled a wagon down Crescent Drive, the street I grew up on, with Barry Goldwater paraphernalia, and knocked on doors, and you know, it was like I don't know how old I was 8. Tried to persuade people to vote for Barry Goldwater. As I turned a teenager, I joined the Teenage Republicans. I was the co-chair of the Tennessee Teenage Republicans when I was a senior in high school. And that's actually how I got to know a lot of folks in Nashville through that. Campaigned for Richard Nixon, was invited to many events related to his inauguration, and campaigned for Howard Baker. I got to meet him several times. Campaigned for Lamar Alexander. Ultimately became a member of the law firm that he had been in. My first desk was his mom's teaching desk. When I was a school teacher in Maryville, her desk was in my office. I was nominated or suggested, I guess you would call it, to be the U.S. Attorney in the Bush administration, Bush 1 administration, by the two of the 3 Republican members of Congress. Believe it or not, in the early 1990s, we had 2 Democrat senators. And so the typical practice of having the senators recommend the U.S. attorneys was not present, since they weren't Republicans. And so Jimmy Quillen and Don Sundquist recommended me, along with another fellow, to be considered for the U.S. attorney's job. I didn't get that job primarily because I had voted almost exclusively in the Democratic primary in Nashville, because if you live in Nashville, you know that you can only, if you want to vote in local politics, you have to vote in the Democratic primary. So that's just background for whatever that's worth. Also, in a year or so, when y'all take the bar, you will have to swear, as I did in 1981. I'm sorry, in the fall of 1980, you'll have to swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. This is not limited to public officials. We all who are licensed attorneys have to swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Tennessee. The oath that we have to take further says, I will conduct myself with honesty, fairness, integrity, and civility to the best of my skill and ability, so help me God. So that's the oath we all have to take if we're going to practice law in the state of Tennessee. Also, as you may remember from CivPro last year, if you sign a document or file a document with a court as a lawyer, you are representing to the court that you have conducted a reasonable investigation into the facts and law, and that you're satisfied that the document is well grounded in both facts and law, and you're acting without any improper purpose. So Wednesday, in my opinion, was the most significant day of constitutional history in my lifetime. I think it's the most important day since the Supreme Court decided Brown versus the Board of Education. Now, it's interesting that the most significant constitutional day in the history of our country in some 66 years did not involve the Supreme Court. We're not going to, there was no decision of the Supreme Court on Wednesday, January 6th. In fact, the Supreme Court probably wasn't even in session. None of the issues, with maybe, I guess, a couple of the cases that had already gone through the Supreme Court and been dismissed, had anything to do with the Supreme Court. In essence, on Wednesday, we had a conflict of the greatest proportion we've ever had in our nation's history between two branches of government, between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And what an incredible single day. It started off in the morning, very early in the morning, with the two Democrat Senate candidates in Georgia who, but for the actions of the President of the United States, would have won their election. They both carried the day in their vote in November. And but for this peculiar situation in Georgia where they have a runoff, they would have won in November. But instead, the President of the United States got involved with his anti-constitutional democracy rhetoric and basically convinced the voters of Georgia to elect somebody other than the two people he wanted. And those two people lost, and two Democrats won in a state that nobody a year ago would have thought that possible. On that same day, that same president incited a mob to descend on the United States Capitol, where Congress was in joint session for the purpose of counting counting the Electoral College results of the 50 states. And that was the purpose of the joint session. It wasn't, they weren't not in session. They weren't there talking about an agriculture bill. They were talking about the certification of the Electoral College votes that had been turned in by the 50 states. That POTUS-inspired, that President of the United States inspired mob rushed the Capitol and disrupted the ongoing of the Congress on that very topic. Two senators of note, I mean, many senators joined this group, but two of note were lawyers who signed the objections to the certification. And those same lawyers had to take that same oath that I just reviewed with you. And they were saying, in essence, by signing that oath, that their petition was well grounded in fact and law. And they were saying that despite the fact that some 60 cases had made it through the courts of the various states that were in question, all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States in some cases, concluding that there was no material evidence of fraud in any of the elections that they were challenging the results of. Congress was not deterred by this mob. They returned to do the job on the same day as the attack. Now remember, this attack was the first time Congress had been, that the Capitol had been attacked since the British burned it in 1814. A foreign enemy. And Congress defeated the challenges to that state certification, not intimidated by the president, not intimidated by the mob. Two former very important supporters of the president, the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and one of his biggest allies, Lindsey Graham, stood on the floor of the House and Senate when they debated and voted with the Constitution, voted to uphold the Constitution of the United States, as is their oath. Senator McConnell even said it was the most important vote he had cast in his 36 years in the Senate. Formerly super loyal Vice President Mike Pence broke with the President of the United States and decided to follow the Constitution. A group within that same mob, inspired by the president, chanted, as many of you have probably heard on media since then, "Hang Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States." Pence, interestingly, joined the House of Representatives in 2001. His first vote in the United States House of Representatives was on this same relative day in 2001, when a joint session of Congress was pulled together for the same purpose of certifying the Electoral College results of the then very close election of 2000. The person presiding over that session of Congress was none other than the candidate for president, the former Tennessee senator and sitting vice president of the United States, Al Gore. Al Gore was in the same position as Mike Pence was in 2021 in 2001. And Mike Pence turned to another new colleague in the House of Representatives that day after Gore finished doing his job of presiding over that joint session of Congress, and said to his colleague how much he admired Vice President Gore in the way that he handled himself that very difficult day. You might remember that Vice President Gore was said to have lost the state of Florida by 527 votes. Finally, that Georgia Senate, one of those Georgia senators, the only one who voted, the other one was quarantined for COVID and was the only senator who did not attend this joint session. The senator who lost on Wednesday morning, Kelly Loeffler, had pledged to vote in favor of the objections with the President of the United States against the certification by Congress of the Electoral College vote. After the attack on the Capitol, she stood in the Senate floor and announced that she was no longer supporting the opposition to the certification because of the President of the United States inspired attack on the Capitol. What an incredible day. It was infamous in many ways. In fact, soon to be Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said it will live in infamy, and I'm sure that it will. But to me, it shows the resiliency of our system, of our government. Think about it. The constitutional founders, the founders of this republic, they were very afraid of the mob. They designed our Constitution, the very framework of our legal system, on that, in part because of their fear of the mob. They designed a system of checks and balances that included not only the three branches of the federal government, the two that were at war with each other on Wednesday, but also the division between the states and the federal government. Think about how this election might have turned out differently if one federal agency was responsible for all 50 states voting. Here, because of the 50 different states having 50 different legal systems over which the 50 different elections were conducted, there was simply no way any one person or entity could have controlled the outcome. It's absolutely impossible. There are 50 different mechanisms for doing so. And then you ought to look at, there are even states that were completely controlled by one party, by people who said they were supporting the president, for example, who certified votes and certified results that were contrary to their own personal opinion, contrary to their wish that the president had won the election, and found that the opponent of their own candidate had won. So these natural checks and balances that were built into our Constitution by our founders and honored by all prior presidents and prior candidates for president before 2020 carried the day. They won. Democracy won. And for this, I think we can all be grateful. All right.